Hello, beloveds, and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery, a podcast for those who are survivors of childhood trauma, emotional neglect, and narcissistic abuse. This podcast is hosted by Rachel Leroy, a college professor and trauma survivor. Many of us spend years trying to heal and don't get anywhere. We don't always target the trauma itself, which is so often what keeps us stuck. This podcast is where faith meets science. Rachel is an emotional healing expert with 20 years of experience applying healing modalities that helped her start making progress after nothing else worked. She'll show you how to do the same. Each week, we'll cover a topic that will show you how to heal trauma for good. Please check out our website and show notes at christianemotionalrecovery.com and join the Facebook community, Trauma Survivors Unite, Christian Emotional Recovery.
Hello everyone, I'm Rachel Leroy, your host at Christian Emotional Recovery, and this is episode 4, season 5, so we're moving right along. Like I said earlier in the podcast this year, we're having about 10 episodes. I'm cutting back a little bit so I can focus on other things, but I will continue to make the podcast, but I want to expand the platform for you guys in ways that might be beneficial for you in other ways. But the podcast will still come out, and if and when I'm able, I will release new YouTubes. Of course, as always, all the podcast episodes are free and also on the YouTube channel as well as on your favorite podcast platform. Also keep in mind that there is a Facebook group where you can get inspiration and community. It's in flux. It's always changing and growing. And also I release updates about the podcast, but most of the updates about the podcast and the platform will be in the newsletter. So if you would like to subscribe to the newsletter, go to christianemotionalrecovery.com or rachelleroy.com. rachelleroy.com is probably the easier place to go. That's RACHELLEROY.com, and Christian Emotional Recovery is all the words together.com. Okay, so that's a little bit about the platform. I'm still trying to work on a way to get a blog started, and like I said, I want to work on this year getting a membership site started and maybe try to open that up sometime in the coming months of late this year, early next year. I haven't set a goal yet, but I do want to do a membership. It may start off kind of small and then get bigger, and as it gets bigger, we'll put more in it, okay? And if we do a membership, there will be monthly resources, and there will also be at least one monthly webinar, a live webinar, so that we can get together and talk and communicate and inspire one another and help one another and heal and answer questions and spend time with God and spend time in our healing processes and talk about those and learn about those and just have a place where you can be safe and comforted and comfortable and learn about all of this stuff in another environment, a place above and beyond and more personable than even the podcast. So let's go ahead and jump in. This episode, I'll be honest, I don't have a speech. I don't have an outline. I'm just going to see what God lays on my heart, and it's going to come from my heart. So bear with me. But this one is episode 4, season 5, and it's You Don't Have to Earn Your Worth. Episode 4, season 5, You Don't Have to Earn Your Worth. And this one, I'll be honest, I like to do spontaneous podcasts a couple of times a year where I just speak what's on my heart, because I don't want everything to just become lists, to-do lists, and 7 steps to this, and all of those are great, and there's not 7 steps to the healing process or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But I like numbers. I like to do things like 21 ways to 21 toxic phrases and what to tell yourself instead. That's what the kind of list I'm talking about. But sometimes I think it's important to get back to basics and to just inspire you and to just encourage you and to just remind you of why we're here and of why you're here and that you're valuable and that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything to be valuable, to be worthy. Because so many of us who survive trauma, we feel like we have to earn certain things. And I do have an idea where I'm going to go in this speech, because there is an area of my life where I'm just going to be transparent. I still struggle to this day. I have tried to figure out a path forward, and I've not been able to. I'll be honest, I've not been able to. I have tried. I've tried a lot, and I've had people accuse me of feeling sorry for myself, of not really trying, of, well, you're doing something wrong, of, you've all heard it. If you're a trauma survivor, can I get an amen? Most of us struggle in some area of our lives, and it's not fair, and it's not our fault. I'm not saying we're not responsible for trying to make it better, and we're not responsible for healing the areas of our life that would allow that area to improve. We're not responsible for setting goals and taking steps and doing the work and doing the emotional healing at the same time in that area that would help us to heal that area. We are responsible for all of those things, but I'm talking about blame, and I'm talking about the fact that there have been areas of my life where I have worked my tail off and not gotten what I worked for. This episode is not about feeling sorry for oneself. It's not about that, but I want you to feel heard, and I want you to feel validated if you've experienced this spinning your wheels in the mud, trying literally, and I mean literally everything, and I mean sticking with it and being consistent and digging your heels in and working your butt off, and still not getting the results you want, and trying something different and working harder and trying smarter and still not getting the results you want. If you have experienced that, I want you to know that you're not deficient, you're not alone, and your breakthrough is coming. Your breakthrough is coming. You know why? Because I can't afford for my breakthrough in this area not to come. You probably are like, Rachel, what are you talking about? So I'm going to get into that in just a little bit. But the theme today is healing isn't a prerequisite for love, respect, or belonging. But I want to focus more here on some of the more external things, because in this podcast, we do talk about love, respect, and belonging. And by the way, they're more important than external things like status and success and money and careers. But come on, those other things are also parts of our lives, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to have good things in those areas of our lives. I could get into the whole thing about the love of money is the root of all evil, and what's going on in the world right now, and the fact that the rich want to take off of the backs of the poor when they already have more than they could ever need. And it's baffling why anybody's greed would be so bottomless that they need to do that instead of giving back to the poor or doing things to help the poor come up and do better for themselves with opportunities. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a more spiritual side of those external things. Is there an area of your life where you struggle, maybe marriage, relationships, friendships, maybe money, finances? We're not supposed to talk about money and finances. Well, you know what? We're going to talk about it on this podcast because that's part of our whole holistic self. You know that this podcast takes a holistic approach to healing. And so we're going to talk about that through, like I said, I try not to use my own experience too much and just talk about myself. But I believe that in this instance, that this personal experience and kind of being vulnerable and honest with you will help you to understand that you're not alone. If you're struggling in an area like this and you've tried for years, maybe even decades to come up higher and to find success. Maybe it's having a home. Maybe it's the car you drive. Maybe it's some other type of thing that is sort of the external manifestations of the internal things going on in our lives. Now, let me get something clear here. When it comes to things like love, relationships, money, vacations, homes, jobs, and stuff like that, cars, they're not as important as love, belonging, and respect. But they are part of our daily lives and part of our daily existence. And I also want to distinguish between struggling to the point that you're starving and you don't have your basic needs met, and struggling where you are maybe struggling, but you're not starving, you're surviving, but you can never get to that next step of prospering or even having security. And that's what I understand. And I want you to know, if you feel that way, you're not alone. So in either of those cases, this can apply, but this is especially for people who maybe you're surviving, and we're all thankful for that. We're thankful if we have food on the table. We're thankful if we have a roof over our heads. We're thankful if we can pay most of our bills most of the time. But I'm also talking about those of you that have tried to get to another level, and you've done everything. You've done all the work, internal and external, and it still hasn't happened. Because that will make you feel more worthless, and that will trigger your shame more than anything else I can think of. You might hear a bird outside my window. He's chirping very loudly, which I love, but if you hear it, I apologize for the background noise. I can't really filter a bird out. I could scare him away, but I'm not going to scare the bird away. I like him. But a little bit about healing not being a prerequisite for success, for feeling worthy. You do not have to earn your worth. So it's easy, like I said, to feel like you're too broken, too far gone, not there yet. That's the one that sticks out to me, not there yet. For a long time, I'm going to tell you my story, like I said, of struggling with finances, and that ongoing story that continues to this day, because I want you to see that if you've experienced something that's gone on that long, and you've done that much work, and you've made that many adjustments, and you've done the internal work and the external work, and you still haven't gotten results, I want you to know, again, you're not deficient, and you are not any less worthy of success, stability, and security than if you were completely healed, or if you had everything figured out, or if you had that degree, or whatever the case may be, okay? So not there yet is the one that I'm really going to focus on, but any of these others also apply to what I'm talking about here. Basically, you might believe that you're too broken, too far gone, or not there yet enough to deserve the life or love you want. So there's a double-edged sword here. On one hand, because you feel unworthy, that decreases the chances that it's going to happen. Great, yeah, that sucks, right? It's like, well, I'm trying to work on that. That's where shame comes in, and you just can't seem to get it. You're trying, you're doing the healing work, you're actually making progress in other areas of your life. Maybe you've even had a lot of breakthroughs and seen things come to pass that you've dreamed of for years or decades in other areas of your life. But this one area of your life, nothing. Or very little. Every once in a while, maybe something happens, but it's not. You know, like I said, you also have to have an open mind. What if God has a different plan for you? And what if you want to be a sales manager, but God has called you to be a marketing manager? I mean, I'm just making something up, but that could be like, you got to keep an open mind. You got to listen to what God wants. You got to listen to God's will. But I don't believe it's God's will for us to struggle our whole lives. I'm not a proponent of the prosperity gospel, but I also don't believe that it's God's ultimate, great, wonderful alternative plan to our life that we want of comfort and love and healing and joy and security and peace and prosperity. That God's plan for us is struggle and disappointment and pain and loneliness and sadness and betrayal. That's actually God's plan for our life. That is not biblical. While I believe some people have taken some of the prosperity scriptures too far in saying, if you give this much money, then you'll get that. And if you do this, then that'll happen. Well, I've seen enough from my own experience to tell you that that's hogwash. But I also have seen too many other people's lives and my own life just looking at everything aggregate, added up, all together, that your mindset, your attitude, how much healing you've done, what's going on inside of you, the choices you make, the choice to be grateful, the choice to take action consistently and have a positive attitude, that how people think and their attitude has a large bearing on how things come out for them. Does it determine it? No. There is a time in Star Trek somewhere, I'm a Star Trek nerd, but there's a time when Captain Picard says something like, you can do everything right. You can learn from your experiences, learn from your mistakes, and sometimes even when you do everything right, it still doesn't come out right. You still don't get the desired result. Sometimes things just don't work out. And that's sad, but that sometimes is true. And there are times where you do everything wrong and you're making mistakes and you're doing dumb and stupid things, and somehow things still work out and you land on your feet. You know people like that who are just, I'm just going to say it. They're dumb. They're not all there, but they're just like these happy-go-lucky, cheerful people, and they always land on their feet, even though they're kind of stupid. I mean, I'm not trying to be demeaning to anybody. I mean that kind of lightheartedly, but you know what I mean. The people that just can't stay out of trouble, but things work out for them. So there is something to this mindset thing. I do believe that. But the thing about my story, for example, is you might hesitate to pursue something you want or something you feel that God has called you to do that you feel is a little above your pay grade. Or you may dismiss compliments or feel embarrassed by them instead of accepting them. You may avoid relationships or avoid spending time with somebody you really love, admire, or respect. Or you may reflect on, but it's important to reflect on the fact that healing and success are not a destination. They're a journey and a process, and yada, yada, yada. I know that sounds like a bunch of platitudes, and I try not to use too many platitudes on this channel, but it's true. Life is a destination. It's always in motion, and the outcome has not been written yet. It's always happening until you take your last breath, So you need to allow yourself to show up messy and still worthy. You need to allow yourself to show up messy and still be worthy. So let me ask you this. If you experienced a lot of childhood trauma and childhood emotional neglect in your childhood, and you have a lot of shame, and you don't feel great about yourself, you feel heck of a lot better than you used to because you've done a lot of the healing work, but you still feel pretty crappy about yourself, do you think you're worthy of having a good job now? Or do you think you should have to heal more in order to be worthy of that job? Do you see how there's a sort of a catch-22 here? That you're taught that you can only have something when you finally hit a certain point in your healing or you hit a certain point in your progression. And then also the fact that you feel unworthy. So it creates this catch-22 you can't get out of. You're never going to get there if you do that. I mean, I know people that say that they have and they've had a breakthrough, so I don't want to take my experience and use it as a template for everything and everybody. There have been areas of my life where I never thought I would make progress externally, and it took years, but I finally did. After all the struggles and all of the trying different things and all of the different healing work that I did. Now, mind you, I'm talking about doing inner work and external work. Like inner work is like healing, meditating, praying, doing somatic modalities in the body to release trauma from your body, doing healing work, doing workshops, joining groups, being in support groups and going to webinars and listening to talks and reading books and writing and doing therapy. You get the idea. And then also, let's just say it's for a job. You're going back to school and you're getting a certification and you're applying for jobs and you're seeing a career counselor and you're practicing job interview skills and you're taking courses that are maybe free or cheap to learn whatever software you need to for that particular job. So those are the external things that I'm talking about. It could be anything. If you're wanting to be a carpenter and do your own business, maybe you're learning how to make different things. Maybe you're taking classes. Maybe you're apprenticing under somebody. You get the idea. So you can adapt this based on whatever your unique goals are. If you want to be in ministry, maybe you're in some ministry training or something like that. But there's internal and external. So you're doing both and you're just not seeing the progress that you want. So my experience, I'm going to have to go back a bit. It's kind of professional and financial at the same time, because for me, I can't separate those two things. And I'll be honest, I've struggled and struggled and strived and strived and struggled in this area of my life, my entire adult life. Some people, it's their relationships. I can't say those are perfect either. Well, that's for another day. But not like in this area. And for some people, it's their something else. But you get the idea. There are all these different areas of our life. And for most people, there's one area where where they struggle the most and they can't seem to make any progress no matter what they do. And I'm not saying it's not possible. I know people who have struggled for decades and then started to make progress after decades of work. The thing is to never, ever, ever give up. Take a break. Try something different. But don't give up overall. You might give up on a particular thing you're doing. I've given up on a few things. I just decided I can't do this anymore. This is not fulfilling, or I'm not enjoying this, or it's not getting anywhere. And I've tried this for months or years. And there is a time to give up. But you have to really pray about that and talk to God about that and meditate on that and listen to your gut and your heart and discern there. But my story starts, I'll admit that I grew up in privilege when it comes to education. When it comes to emotional healing and relationships and finances, not so much. My parents struggled. We had enough food on the table and we had a roof over our heads, and I'm thankful for that. But there were times, I never got to have a lot of the things that my cousins and my friends had. And I had other friends that struggled like I did, so we could commiserate. But it's one of those things where when you're 7 years old and you have a cousin and you both love My Little Ponies and you're really close and you play with these My Little Ponies, you get together and they get 9 for Christmas and you get 2. It sounds so petty and so stupid, but I cried. And so this sort of unworthiness and seeing like this child was loved and I was yelled at and stuff like that, you start this comparison thing, especially when the areas, like when the person is loved and has a safe environment. I'm not saying they had a perfect childhood, by no means did they. And they had family issues too, but like overall they grew up safe and secure and loved. And then they also had more financially, and you're like, where's the trade-off? This sucks. They had advantages over you in every way, and that can sting so much, because even now it's hard not to compare when you get on social media. It's a trap. Just picture Admiral Akbar, if you're a Star Wars fan, that fish man or whatever. It's a trap. It is a trap. Do not start looking at social media. For example, I'll be honest, I was just half asleep and I couldn't sleep, so I opened Facebook and I went straight to a picture of a Facebook friend that's a very close relative, and they go on all these expensive vacations, and I haven't been on I've been on a weekend vacation, but I haven't been on like a real 5+ day vacation probably in 10 years. Literally. And they're like on this beach, and they look like they've both lost all this weight, and they look great, and they're always going all these places like Scotland and Italy and the Caribbean and Mexico and Canada, and it stings because I didn't expect that. I wasn't thinking about that, and it just came out of nowhere, and I haven't struggled in that area of comparison lately, and I was like, ow, oh my gosh. Because traveling is something I really want to do, and it's not something I get to do more than locally. So I try to enjoy my local travels and take refuge in those and take pride in and enjoy those and show off my pictures and not compare myself to other people. But when I was a child, I remember that. And then I went to school and I got a degree in English. I was told that if I was true to myself and I got a degree in something I loved, that the money would follow. That is true for some people. For me, it was a bunch of hogwash. It was a bunch of BS. The money did not follow. Not sooner and not later. It never happened. I started teaching at a college where I was overworked and underpaid, and that was at the time when I was young and I did not understand what trauma was. I didn't know what had happened to me. I was told, no, you weren't abused. So I believed it. I was told, no, you were born deficient. There's something wrong with you. So I walked around with a spirit of, I am deficient. There's something wrong with me. So I had even more shame than I do now. And I felt like there was something wrong with me because I couldn't get promoted. I tried for 12 years to get promoted there. I worked myself to death. I almost ended up in the hospital several times. I was already overworked. They gave us literally, according to the professionals in my field, twice as much work as what is recommended for that kind of job. A professor teaching and grading papers. I was teaching 5 classes, teaching 120 students in person, and I also had to grade 120 essays every time an essay came in, and that was 5 essays a term. And each essay took about 20 to 30 minutes to grade. So you do the math. It was, and grading essays is exhausting. It's very involved. And I was very underpaid, very overworked. I had great benefits, but the pay was extremely low. So I felt completely like crap about myself. So I started on this journey of going through these different phases. And I mean, these phases were not something I tried for 2 or 3 months. And I was like, well, Rachel, you didn't stick with anything. When I say phases, I mean 10 and 15 year phases, some of them overlapping with each other. One of the things I tried was prosperity gospel. For me, at least, hogwash, BS, unbiblical, doesn't work. Another one I tried, which overlaps greatly with it, and in some ways it's the same thing, is law of attraction. BS, and it just brainwashes you into believing that everything is your fault. At least that's been my experience. Now, there are different camps of law of attraction, and like I said, I'm not saying there's nothing to prosperity gospel and there's nothing to law of attraction, but making it the foundation of your faith or your spiritual practice for Christians and non-Christians alike is toxic. I'll say it again, it's toxic. And law of attraction, I did all the work. I mean, hardcore. I did the meditations. I did the journaling. I did the EFT tapping for years and years. I dug in and got to the roots of all of my beliefs about my finances. I prayed. I asked God for help. I gave money. I supported ministries. I did the work. I worked my butt off. I was told, well, if you want to make more money, you're going to need to get another degree. Mind you, I already had a bachelor's and a master's. So I went back to school while teaching 5 classes, and in the summers, worked on my degree. 3 years later, I finished my master's in my MFA in creative writing, which is basically like a PhD in that field. It's a terminal degree. So I was $20,000 more in student debt, still couldn't pay off my student loans, and, well, guess what happened? We went through like 5 bosses while I was at that university, and the last boss that came in was an abusive psychopath. I'm not saying that as a judgmental thing. He was literally an abusive psychopath. And if you know anything about narcissism, psychopathy, and empaths and highly sensitive souls, who, even in a work environment, does a psychopath target? If there's 50 people or 100 people in a department, and there's 5 or 6 empaths, who is he going to target? He targets the empaths. So I became one of his targets. It was one of those things where he would be gracious and kind and generous and charismatic around everybody else, and everybody loved him. And then he would secretly abuse 5 or 6 people. So it was like, if you know anything about relationship dynamics and narcissists, you know how they are. Well, it happens in a work environment too, but in a group of people, usually, look, I'm just saying he, it could be a she too, but usually he will abuse one person or a small group of people. And then when those people speak to the other people that aren't being abused, the people either are somewhat sympathetic and like, but that hasn't happened to me, or most likely they don't believe you at all. Because if you already have emotional problems, they're going to think, well, she's just being hysterical. She's making stuff up. She wants attention. Well, long story short, I'd worked there for 12 years. My health was in the toilet. I was making low pay. I had great benefits. I loved the people I work with in some ways, but let's just say that I think that in whole work environments, you can have toxic work environments where the overall dynamic is narcissistic. And that was what was going on in my work. Well, when I left after 12 years, I had worked with some of those people that entire 12 years. I sent an email to the entire faculty saying, I will miss you. And I told them how much it had meant to me working here and about my growth and about my experience and how I loved working with everybody. Out of, I think, 61 people, I got one response from a colleague of any kind. One. Okay? So I do know what it feels like to give your absolute best and get absolutely nothing back for it. I went to school. I put in the $20,000 or whatever it was for my degree. I gave up 3 summers. I also wrote my thesis during one of my teaching school years, which meant putting in about 60 hours a week. And knowing what you know, if you know anything about me, about my health, that literally was killing me, but I did it anyway. And my health will never completely recover. I think I have chronic conditions because of how I worked myself to death when I was there. And when this psychopath came in, he targeted me. He observed my classroom And he basically told me I had no merit as an instructor. Mind you, I had exceptional teaching evaluations. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to put it out there. Exceptional teaching evaluations, pretty much term after term. And I had other people observe me. They said that my teaching was fine. There were areas where I needed to grow, but I wasn't perfect, but I was a good instructor. I was naturally good at what I did, and I love what I did. But, according to him, I had no merit as an instructor. When he said that, I was on my way to teach a class, and he knew that. He said that on purpose because he knew I would have to go and stand in front of my class, and I'm a very professional teacher. I don't teach in person anymore, but at that time I was teaching 5 classes a day in person. And I walked into the classroom and I just told my students what had happened. I was so flabbergasted. I'd never had anything like that happen. And I told them that, and I started crying in front of my students. I could not function. I was physically ill. Well, if that wasn't enough, my boss, who after he said that, came to the door of my classroom, followed me to my classroom just to continue to harass me. He didn't need anything. He didn't have any questions. He didn't want anything. He literally just followed me. A few minutes later, he came and just stood in the hallway. And I said, guys, I'm sorry. I'm feeling very ill. I wasn't really feeling physically ill, but I said, I'm feeling very ill and I'm going to leave. I can't stay. I'm sorry. Go home. And I just said, I'll put your assignments online. And I said, I'll report that I'm out today. And my boss, I said, I'm sorry. I'm feeling sick. I have to go home. And I just walked past him and I left. And like a week or two later, I went to talk to my dean. He didn't care. He said he can do whatever he wants. He did not care. If I knew then what I know now, I would have filed a lawsuit and I would have gone to HR. But I didn't know then what I know now. So I ended up going to him and saying, if you'll let me get on unemployment, because if you're terminated, I knew he was going to terminate me just because he didn't like me. And if you know anything about employment laws, you know that if you quit a job, if you're fired, a lot of times you can't get unemployment, but if you resign, sometimes you can. It depends on the circumstances. At least that was that. So I went to him and I said, I'll make a deal with you, because I knew that he was not going to keep me there. So I had to look out for myself and I had to do the best thing I could for myself in that situation. And what I ended up doing was I said, I will resign if you will make sure that I can get unemployment benefits, because your old boss, I don't remember, but something with your old boss. And he said, deal. I'll be honest, at least he honored that. He did honor that. And I left. And I knew that if I stayed, I wouldn't have ended up staying a year. I wouldn't have been there beyond that year anyway. Even though I had survived 5 chopping blocks over the course of 12 years. They had eliminated large numbers of faculty 5 different times over 12 years. I survived all the cuts. And I had high teaching evaluations, but somehow I had no merit as an instructor. So that, I ended up starting to work at home at that point, and I could never find a full-time job, because in faculty, they were going from full-time and tenure positions to adjunct. An adjunct, if you don't know anything about it, is low pay, and it's basically a work meal. And I'll be honest, I'm doing adjunct now. The pay is poor. I've continued to do it for 10 years. I'm working at a different university online. I'm also a team lead. And just to show you that the psychopath that I worked for was targeting me, I worked at this new university online. I was hired 3 months. I got unemployment, and then I was hired as an adjunct. It was part-time, no benefits, lower pay, even lower pay. But I was happier, and I was being treated like a human being. And I still work at this university to this day. The pay is still low, and that's why I've been looking for a better paying job. And online jobs are very hard to come by, and so I'm still looking. But I'm looking for something that pays better, even though I love my job. But I had been working for, I think, 6 months, 5 months, and my dean contacted me and said, you have exceptional teaching skills, and I want you to apply to be a team lead, which is basically mentoring other faculty for teaching. So within 6 months of being at this other school, I was promoted to team lead. And I team led for about 2 years, and then they eliminated some team leads, so I was no longer a team lead. I didn't take that too personally. I continued to teach, and then about a year and a half ago, the openings for team leads came open again, and I applied, and I became a team lead again, so I'm doing it again. And so, moral of the story is I did everything right. In the meantime, since I've been at home, that's when I started digging and found that I had been abused. I did find that there was nothing wrong with me, that the problems that I had were because of abuse that I had endured and experienced. Now, I was responsible for my own healing, that's true. And in all the time that I was at the first university I worked at, I did law of attraction. I mean, I'm talking like an hour a day of meditations and journaling and praying, and I would just do it consistently. Read books. I would read books, do programs, do meditations. I would do Christian programs. I would do other programs. Nothing. Nothing. And I would try to target the roots of all of my problems. I would try to find hidden things. They were saying, well, oh, you're not doing this, so I would try this. Oh, well, you're not doing that, so I would try that. And I would be consistent at it for years at a time. My financial situation, and I would target my work, my attitude towards my work, money, my relationship with money, the root traumas of that. Nothing. So it also put a strain on my relationship with God. And that's just sad because I believe God is a provider. If God's a provider and I've been praying for 20 years, why has nothing happened, So and then you start to feel shame there because, well, then there's something wrong with me, or I'm doing something wrong, or I'm missing something, or maybe I am deficient, at least in this one area. And you know what? I still struggle with that to this day. I've still not figured it out. I don't know if this is just God's call in my life. It's just not to have a lot of money, not to have the job that would allow me to, at this point in my life, to do the podcast. I probably would give up the podcast for a really good paying teaching job that I love, or instructional design is what I've been trying to transfer to. And like I said, I'm not going to bore you with all the details of what I'm doing now, but I'm doing all the professional stuff to try to get the job. I've seen a career counselor. I've done my resume. I've got feedback on my resume, more feedback on my resume. I've updated it. I'm using AI. I'm using AI programs to run my cover letters and resumes through it. I don't want to bore you, but I'm doing everything. And last year, around the beginning of the year, I had 4 job interviews lined up and I got COVID. And I couldn't get out of bed. And I had to give up those 4 job interviews. For some reason, it all just happened at once. And then, and nothing since then. You have to remember it's on and off. I don't want to burn myself out. So I'll do it for 3 months and then take a couple of months off. I'll do it for 2 months, take a month off. You get the idea. But it's been that struggle since then. And I struggle with, the whole point of sharing this story is there's probably some area of your life where you've struggled similarly and you can relate. And you feel worthless, and you feel like, what is wrong with me? And you feel like, well, then that must mean that God doesn't think I've grown enough to deserve this thing now. Or I'm not saying that everything you want or need you're going to get now. That's not what I'm saying. There is timing to things. God has timing to things. But also, at some point when something just doesn't happen, you start to believe, well, maybe I just don't deserve it. Well, maybe there's just something wrong with me. Well, maybe I'm just doing something wrong. Maybe you're not. I'm not saying that you're not doing anything wrong. I'm not saying that there's not something inside of you that's unresolved that could be blocking that. That is very possible. And maybe it's still true for me, but maybe, what if it's not? What if there's nothing wrong with me? There never was. What if I've always been worthy of that success here and now? When I say here and now, I mean in all those times that I was working towards it, and it just didn't happen because I had crappy luck. I know Christians aren't supposed to believe in luck, but you cannot tell me some of life isn't chance, because it is. Why does one person pray for healing from cancer and they survive another 5 years and then they pass away? Another person survives 2 weeks and then passes away, and another person is cured. And they all did all the same things, all right. You cannot tell me that it's 100% the things you do and the things you're trying that create the results, because it's not true. And this is what I've come to find from my experience, at least. Yeah, you know that I don't oversimplify things. I don't take the lazy way out. In my opinion about how life works with all this stuff, is it's a combination of things. If you've ever seen Forrest Gump, they were talking about fate, and then they were talking about making your own destiny. And there were two conflicting philosophies there. And you know what I think it is? Forrest, being as simple as he was so smart and so profound that he understood it was both. He had that deep soul understanding, even though he was a simple man. And I, from my experience, believe it is a combination of attracting things based on your desires, your attitude, and your focus, and what's in your unconscious mind. I believe it's a combination of also the choices that you make and the actions you take, taking control of your destiny, and I believe there's a certain amount of it that's chance. And how God's will comes into all that, I don't know, but I do believe God's will is at the center of all of that. And I can't say for sure. I know God is sovereign. I don't know why certain things have not happened for me. I'll be honest, I stopped believing in God for a while. It wasn't because of just the money. It was because of all the pain and just not making progress in that area for a long time. And I'm trying to rebuild my relationship with God, and I'm struggling with it right now, but I am trying. And just like Jacob wrestled with the angel, I will wrestle with God to my dying day, but I will not stop pursuing God, and I will not stop opening myself up to allowing God to pursue me. And you don't need to do that either. Whatever happens, God is at the center of it, and God's sovereign. I don't have all the answers. I don't know why bad things happen. If you're looking for why children die of cancer and starve to death, and why bad people win, and why good people sometimes lose, and why sometimes abusers get away with things and they don't ever seem to get any karma, and then good people, bad things happen to them, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But I do believe that at the end of all things, God will make everything right. And I believe that even in this lifetime, quite often he does. And I do believe that the story is still being written, and we don't have all the answers. And that's why I believe it's a combination of our attitude and our mindset, of the choices we make and the actions we take, and of unconscious beliefs that we have, and things we may not be aware of, factors we're not aware of, other people's choices. If they decide to make crappy choices and it screws us over, yeah, that's not fair, but that does happen. And that's why I try to be good to other people as much as I can. I've screwed people over too. I'm not going to lie. And I feel bad about it. But I try not to do that. And I've not done it too many times, I don't think. But in the other one, like I said, some of it's just chance. Some of it's just chance. And I don't have an answer as to why or if it's God's will. But it's his permissive will because it's happening. And ouch, that's hard to swallow. Ouch. So this is getting a little theological, but for me, you have to step away from all of that enough to look at the big picture, enough to know that your worth is not earned. That no matter what has not manifested in your life, no matter how many times you tried, no matter what you've done, no matter what work you've put in, no matter how much other people have mistreated you, no matter how unfair life has been, you are still worthy of good things, and you are still here. You still matter. And yes, if you want that, I'm not trying to be crude or sound like prosperity gospel, but if you want that marketing degree, or if you want that marketing job, or if you want that $25,000 car, I'm not even going to get extravagant. Or if you want that 2-bedroom house in the suburbs and you haven't been able to get it, even though you've tried, that does not mean you don't deserve it. And it doesn't mean you're not worthy of it. And the same is true for relationships, love, belonging, and those things that are deeper. Love, respect, and belonging are more important than those other things. Those other things do not bring love, respect, and belonging. Love, respect, and belonging do not bring those other things, at least not directly. Maybe indirectly a little bit, you feel more worthy, and then those things are more open to coming to you. But that doesn't guarantee they will or won't. So what I'm saying is a lot of it, life is just as much chance as anything else, and give yourself a break. Don't blame yourself for everything. The other thing is if God is sovereign And if we do our best, and if we're trying so hard and we blame ourselves when we've done everything, we're almost playing the role of God because we act like we have control to change everything. And we do have a lot of power and we do have a lot of control, but you're not God. You're not God. You can't control everything. And if you've done everything you can and it hasn't worked out, then maybe it's not your fault. Maybe you did do everything you could. Maybe you did do everything right. I'm not saying you're perfect, but I'm saying maybe just rest and let God be God and just accept where you're at, even though, gosh, that is the hardest thing to swallow in the world. Oh my gosh, I'm still at a place at my age, after all my experience, where I'm having trouble letting go of that and not blaming myself and not feeling like, what am I missing? What did I do wrong? I'm not saying stop. I'm not saying give up, but I'm saying that you've got to let yourself rest in the Lord a little bit and just accept where you're at and not take the blame for that. And, the other thing to do is to blame God. And I don't have an easy answer for how not to blame God, but just go talk to God. Don't blame him, but just go talk to him and say, God, what the heck? What is up? I'm so frustrated. I don't understand. Talk to God. Tell him how you're struggling. Tell him how frustrated you are. Now, you can't cycle through that over and over and over because it can get counterproductive. And it can start to create this loop and you end up going in a spiral that you can't get out of. But you do need to express those frustrations with God. Take a break. Try something else. Get philosophical. I think it's important to get information and wisdom from a lot of different sources, even within Christianity. If you notice, if you're in the group, I use a diverse, library of sources. I'll put in some Catholic stuff, some conservative stuff, some more progressive stuff, some Protestant stuff. I'll use some stuff from Martin Luther, some stuff from Bonhoeffer, some stuff from C.S. Lewis, some stuff from maybe a more progressive woman. I mean, I have all these different sources that I use because I think Christianity is this beautiful rainbow glass sculpture of all of these things put together. And it makes this beautiful diversity of all these colors that reflect the light back of God's goodness, of how many different people there are in the world and how many different experiences there are. And so what I'm saying is study the law of attraction a little bit. Study, don't get into the hardcore messed up stuff. I'm just going to be honest. Kenneth Copeland and Joel Osteen, I don't generally call names and say false prophets because there are a lot of preachers who think everybody is a false prophet. And I try to keep an open mind. But then there are some people who are just so far into some of that stuff that it's obvious they only care about money. And if you listen to Joel Osteen, I used to listen to him. I used to love him. This is just my opinion. I think he's a snake. I think he's a snake oil salesman. That's just my opinion. Kenneth Copeland, I know he is. But some of these people, all they care about is money. Some people have attacked Joyce Meyer. I love Joyce Meyer. I still think she's great. She's even repented of how far she took some of the prosperity gospel. And yes, she has a nice home and a nice car. I don't have a problem with that. The thing is when you have a $80 million house and you have 8 houses, where do you draw the line? But you see what I'm saying? Try these just learn philosophy about different perspectives on life and see how it all kind of comes together, because I don't think it is one specific thing. It's about Christ. Yes. It's about Jesus. Yes. It's about his sacrifice. Yes. But how do we go about our daily lives in a practical sense? How do we reconcile things that we have done everything right? We have prayed. We thought God told us that this was what was going to happen and it didn't happen. How do you deal with that? Especially as a trauma survivor who has done everything, has tried everything. You got to give yourself a break. You're still worthy of those things. Those things can still happen. That doesn't necessarily mean you've done anything wrong or you've fallen short or you've done anything wrong. Sometimes it is chance. A lot of it is chance. A lot of it is luck. I know there are Christians that say, I don't believe in luck. I do. I don't know what to call it. I could be wrong, but I'm just saying that some things are chance. I mean, when you go up to a red light, whether you get the green or the red, is that God's will or is that timing? I think it's just timing. And I think it's just chance how you get there. What time do you leave the house? Do you get behind a slow car? What speed do you go? Do you slow down going around the curve? All those things. And then when you come up to the light at that certain second, everybody else that's been in those cycles of their own, it's very complicated. And it's all working together in this complex system that we can't possibly understand every factor. So I'm just saying you are worthy. It doesn't change if you're worthy if it hasn't happened. The law of attraction will tell you that it is. That is a lie from Satan. That is BS. You are worthy. Even if it hasn't happened, you are worthy. You are worthy of having good things now. There is a time when you're ready for certain things, where you're not ready and maturity comes into play and God will hold you back. That's true. But there are also times where I just don't have answers to why certain things haven't happened. But I want you to know that it doesn't change your worthiness. It doesn't change your worth. It has no reflection on your worth whatsoever. And you're not a failure. Maybe you've done everything right and things just haven't worked out yet. They haven't worked out yet, but they will. Give it time and don't give up. So if this message has been valuable to you, I hope that it's resonated with you. I talked about a lot that I haven't shared before. I've talked about a lot about myself. I don't always do that, but sometimes I think sharing a personal story can be helpful to help you see where I'm at, so you know you're not alone and that I'm still struggling in certain areas. Now, I've made major progress in my healing. I've made major progress in certain relationships and in relationships in general, and I've made major progress in just my ability to use my mind to do certain things. Our minds and hearts are such a gift from God. We need to use them and develop them. So work on yourself and keep doing stuff and keep learning and growing and trying new things and keep being consistent and persistent, and don't give up, and observe and learn and absorb those things and keep working on your healing and keep working on the external stuff too, because you've got this. You've got this. You are worthy of those successes and they will come. And keep an open mind about what that might mean and what they are. What if you want a house in the mountains, but somehow you get married and you end up in on a tropical island? I mean, that's still good too, right? So keep your mind open about where you end up. I'm using a ridiculous metaphor, but you get what I'm saying. So just keep your mind open about what God's will may be. Remember that God is sovereign and you can't control everything, and that's actually a good thing, because that takes a lot of the pressure off of you, and that's not contingent. Your worthiness is not contingent on that at all, on the outcome. And see, law of attraction teaches you that you believe you're worthy, therefore you are worthy, therefore it happens. But your worthiness has nothing to do with the outcome. Your worthiness has nothing to do with the outcome. You are worthy whether things work out the way you want to, whether they work out great or not. You're still worthy. You're still you. That doesn't change. God's love for you and God's belief in your worth, your inheritance in Him, doesn't change at all, no matter what the outcome is. So just remember that and keep going with that in mind when things don't work out. Because a lot of times the things working out are just around the corner, or they work out in a way you don't expect, but still in a way you couldn't have imagined it any other way. So trust God, move forward, wrestle with it, don't give up. Sometimes you're not going to have answers. Sometimes things happen by chance. But keep going and know that it has nothing to do with your worth. Remember, beloveds, you don't have to earn your worth. This is episode 4, season 5 of Christian Emotional Recovery. And remember, beloveds, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God loves you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Christian Emotional Recovery, hosted by Rachel Leroy. For links to this week's resources and to join the discussion, check out this episode's show notes at christianemotionalrecovery.com, where you can also find links to our YouTube channel and Facebook group. Join our email list and get other episodes and resources. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review the podcast and tell a friend who may benefit from this message. See you next time. And remember, beloveds, God loves you, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made.